Do you like magic, and are you filled with the spirit of volunteerism? I just didn't know where you were going with that.
No, not quite that interesting. Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories. Welcome back to So Here's My Story. I'm Jody.
I'm Elliot.
And Elliot's story today is very timely as we were cruising towards the end of the year.
Yes, we are.
We end up talking about how you, whether you do this at the end of the year or not, like how you surprise, delight, reward your employees and where that can go wrong and how expectations verge into all of that. But so before we get to that story, though, just a quick reminder, if you have not checked out the Facebook group, that one of the easiest ways to do that is to text the word story to 345-345. And there will be some prompts there to get to the Facebook group. But most importantly, please tell a friend about the show.
Please do.
All we want for Christmas is more listeners. Let's tell your story.
Okay. So here's my story. I was speaking to one of my clients the other day, and they told me that they had to get off the phone because they were taking he was taking his entire staff out to Nordstrom's. They were just spending
His staff to Nordstrom's?
He was taking his entire staff to Nordstrom's. They were spending the bulk of the day there. He'd given each of them a budget, and they could buy whatever they wanted.
Like a shopping spree.
It was a shopping spree, and this was just something
which, by the way, it just occurred to me, all of our listeners aren't like all in the same place. Nordstrom's is a fancy pantsy.
It is. It's a fancy department store.
Department store. That's what I couldn't think of.
High end, I think they would prefer to call it.
Yes, not fancy pantsy.
Not fancy pantsy. That's not on their logo.
That's not on brand.
No, but yeah. So it was just as a thank you. It's not like it was their Christmas bonus or anything that kind of was designated as a thank you day. But he was saying that they were working really hard and he appreciated their efforts, and it's one of the things that he likes to do in order to show appreciation. And we had talked about that, and a number of years ago, I had decided that I would do the same thing. I would take, or the same concept. I took my employees and their spouses to New York to see Wicked.
Oh, fun.
So we got from here in Maryland, it's a couple-hour bus ride. I rented a bus, and we piled in. We went up. We saw Wicked. We stayed overnight. We had a breakfast, whatever. It was great. It's a certain investment. But I really my goal was to show people that not only did I appreciate them and to foster some sort of more spirit of the firm or togetherness or whatever, but also, of course, I wanted to make sure that if they ever talked about the firm to anybody, they would say, "Hey, we did this really cool thing,"
right.
and then people that I want to have work here would think, "Hey, that might be a really nice."
It's funny, you can't see this, but what I wrote down over here, and I'll get to the other things in a second. One of the things I wrote down with this level of thing that I was labeling thank you surprise is this quote like, "I wish I worked there." Like sometimes people say a thing that they did, and even though I'm not looking for a job, I'm like, "Oh man, that sounds like a cool place to work."
Well, because if your ideal recruit were to sit down on a couch next to one of your employees and said, "Hey, why should I work at your company?" The answer is not going to be a bullet point list. The answer is going to be a story.
Right.
And so I wanted the story at that point. I wanted the story to be, hey, they're a law firm, but he took us to Wicked. We went up to New York. We had dinner. We had this,
Which kind of hearkening back to your business is a, extension of your values. And we talked about that in that episode from ethics and morals and choices, that kind of thing. But it is also this, you and your family go to New York. We're planning a trip to New York to see a show. I immediately, tapped into the wisdom of Nikki on how to do that. Cause that is something that you guys do. So it speaks to the fabric of who you are as a person and the things that you enjoy. And the cool thing about that is what I'm not saying is that if someone's not into Broadway shows, they shouldn't work here at Wagenheim Law, but it does speak to a certain kind of person. Whereas if what you did was, a paintball thing, or I'm trying to pick something that maybe wouldn't appeal to you specifically. I don't know what that would be, but somebody might be like, ooh, that's not the kind of thing that I want to do. And it helps people get a feel for, is this my place?
Well, it does. But I will tell you, as you know, and as I've certainly mentioned, my mother is an attorney, and she used to work, before she retired, she worked at a large firm in downtown Baltimore, and they were part of a softball league with a lot of other firms, but they would require, it was an absolute requirement, they would require their associates.
You had to play softball?
No, you didn't have to play, but you had to go. You had to at least attend if you're, yes. And so she and my sister, also a lawyer, my sister would refer to this as mandatory fun.
Yeah.
And my mother detested this. And so here she was in all she wore. She would, for a pool party, she would wear the same thing, her suit and her pearls and her heels. And she would trot out and sit on the bleachers for the requisite amount of time, begrudgingly. And she doesn't know the rules of baseball or softball. And she'd just watch, and then she'd leave when she could. Mm-hmm. So there's a difference.
If cell phones were a thing back then, she would have been on her cell phone.
She would have been on her phone.
Time.
Yes.
Right.
But so my sister, who works with me and was working at the firm at that time when we all went up to Wicked, she didn't want to go. She doesn't like mandatory fun. That's not. So you do run a risk when you choose this activity, like your example was paintball or softball for my mother, or some people just look, I don't want to go up to New York and see a show.
So there's another level there. And this is, by the way, quick pause. It is fascinating that you brought this up, because in the CEO Roundtable group that I ran yesterday, this topic of what started off as what are some ideas you've seen for a really cool way to thank people, just a neat layer of things to do. Mm-hmm. And then it also diverged into this whole other conversation that I do want to get into here about the difference between thank you surprise level things versus bonuses and then a difference in two ways the word bonus is used, bonus as in, hey, almost like a tip, wow, this was great, here's a little extra of a thing, whether it's money or gifts. And then very important to make distinct from bonus that is tied to an incentive plan. And the reason I do want to touch on all those layers is how expectations then flow into all this. But before we get into all that, because one of the things that did come up yesterday was some of trip-based things, because somebody else brought up a local company that the owners have a place in St. John's. And so they already have a place, and then other family members of theirs have another place right near it. So they were relatively speaking, inexpensively able to take their whole small company to St. John's for a week. Well, there's lots of reasons that, whether or not that's financially possible. Somebody brought up the idea of not everyone wants to travel or forget whether they're into Wicked. Yeah. Some people just don't want to travel with work people. People have different sort of privacy.
It's like an episode of Politically Incorrect. You wind up with, Madeleine Albright, Robert Downey Jr., and Mr. T, and these people just don't gel together.
Right. Which is in theory a risk. And certainly different size companies, this comes to different levels. But I would also encourage people not to wildly overthink it and nix an idea just because, well, not everybody likes paintball, or not everybody likes musicals, or not everybody likes to, because as long as you do not push the thing in terms of a mandatory fun mindset, if you don't,
there's not a company meeting and on the Monday, and then or you are demonized if you don't go, or that is where it can really, really go awry. And because especially since the whole reason you're doing it is making sure that whatever feeling you are trying to create in people, that the way you do it actually creates that feeling, versus correct.
I want them to be really happy and feel appreciated. And then you layer in and you have to go. And if they don't want to go, then that certainly does not create that feeling.
Well, because there's nothing wrong when I said a company meeting on the Monday, there's nothing wrong with doing that, having a retreat. You have a company meeting on a Monday, you mix in some fun and whatever. But that's not the same as a thank you for all your work. That's just... That's a strategy you're employing.
Different.
Yeah, it's different.
So it was interesting. I do want to, a couple of the things just because I thought it was a really fun conversation. One person had taken their team, these were in the experience categories, had taken them to that new indoor go-kart place where you can ride go-karts cool. 60 miles an hour. I mean, it is, it's not just it's a pretty intense thing. So that I thought was cool. Another person, there's a mobile art glass truck thing. So like if you have an event
is that what it's officially called?
Oh yeah, of course. That's what it says right on the side.
Jones Mobile Art Glass truck thing.
Yeah, exactly. That like if you have an event at a restaurant, they'll be outside so people can go out, like blow a glass ornament,
Really?
like do a thing, and then come back in. Yeah,
that's very cool.
Yeah, he's going to send me the information, so I'll send it to you. Cool things like that. So they didn't necessarily want to go and do a whole class. Oh, which is another thing that came up, like doing a class like forging or glass blowing. That's how that came up, and things like that. Another layer came in that I feel like we've mentioned on this before, because we did get into the like, well, what if everybody's not into that? And so we talked some about like specializing. And of course, every now and then somebody would be like, or maybe it's just better to give them cash so they can do what they want with it. So we'll get to that part in a second. But so I brought up a thing that I had read a while back that I feel like I mentioned on an episode at some point, but that I was reading somewhere where a company in their intro forms, so the forms like, name, address, all that stuff when you're onboarding, have a question buried in there just as part of everything else of if you had $100, if the found money that you didn't, would you spend, like, how would you spend it? Why are you laughing?
I'm laughing because I was waiting for what this question would be like on the forums. Do you like magic and are you filled with the spirit of volunteerism? I just didn't know where you were going.
No,
with that,
not quite that interesting. What's your favorite alcohol?
Right.
So it was like, if you had $100 that you didn't need, or, what would you spend it on? And I thought it was a cool way to just and they use it not for a group thing. They don't like all in one fell swoop go buy everybody what that thing is. Yeah. They use it in moments where they want to do it like an individual specialty thing that they can give somebody like
that's
a little
good to know. That's very cool to know.
Because in that case, so this was an important distinction of how much you need to think about the specificity of enjoyment of the thing. Like if you give everybody on your team, a gift card to a spa, well, I know a few people who like will never walk into a spa. Like they can't stand
I absolutely
the
know some
thought
people
of
that
getting a massage
would never do
or
that.
whatever.
Yes.
So it can fall flat. But I wouldn't get hung up on that. One other very cool thing was that I'm deeming it very cool. It was my idea, but I have used it a lot. Is mobile detailing. Mobile car detailing. Okay. So it's a gift certificate or somebody actually had the people come to their place of work. So like while everyone's in there, this group of people are out there completely detailing their cars so they don't have to go somewhere and wait, and you come out and your car's all clean and shiny and bright.
But see, one of the cool things about that is, one of the things that really appeals to me about that is that the impact of whatever's done is also seen by the family, the spouse or whatever. And I just like it because if you work at a place, this is my own personal theory, but if you work at a place and your spouse thinks it's a really nice company, then your positive feelings about it, I think, naturally increase. So I like it, and I've talked about this before for one of my clients. I know they just had a baby. They were going out for the first time, having left the child with the grandparents. And I knew where they were going because my client mentioned that he was leaving from here to meet his wife. And I just sent them dessert, just charged it.
See, you are so I would never, ever, ever think of that.
Well, I just wanted to, and it's a little thing. So it doesn't have to be a trip to St. John's, which are great, but I just sent them dessert. But one of the things that I loved is that his wife liked it. It's not just a little bit. His wife was like, wow, it's really cool that you work with that company.
Yeah.
So the auto detailing is like the same thing.
Because the family's like, oh my gosh, your car's not a biohazard anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now you can't surprise people with the auto detailing or at least me anyway, because I need like at least, some amount of time to get my car into a place where it can be detailed.
No, you can't surprise. And you have to choose. I did have a client a number of years ago. Actually, to be fair, I'm not even sure if it was a client or just somebody who was telling me that they did this, but they decided that their surprise for their company was going to be trapeze school. And I
would love that.
Yes, but I'm not sure that like Chuck in accounting, is really going to want to learn trapeze in front of all of his coworkers.
Well, actually, you bring up one really good point. Is that any kind of thing that's a group activity? I do think it's worth a little bit of thought. Is if there's somebody who is going to, just be in a terrible emotional space the whole day because it's either like too physically challenging or they can't do it. It's embarrassing for them that they can't do that thing or they can't keep up, or just like, are you going to isolate someone in a way that, you're hoping for this great experience, but, and then one particular person.
Right. If the classic is that, hey, we're going to have a swim party or whatever. And some people are just not comfortable, but you had brought up a number of different layers of this, and it had to do with expectations.
Yeah,
and I wanted to make sure we circled back on that.
Well, it was so interesting because I hadn't really thought about these layers until as we talked, like this sort of stratosphere kind of began to bubble in my mind. One of them was this way in which two people were using the word bonus interchangeably, but one of them was talking about bonus in terms of the incentive plan along a year. Like if you do this and then you get this, and then you earn this bonus. Like that's,
that's performance.
That is, it's performance tie. I would count that as part of compensation.
I agree, yeah.
It sets an expectation because it is literally laid out as if you do this, then it's a formula.
And people go through their year going, okay, what kind of bonus am I going to get? And
right. So that I'm just sort of putting, because that is not what we're talking about. So I put that one aside. Then there's a kind of bonus, and we don't need to even make the distinction at this point in my description, my stratification of whether this bonus is money or a thing, that at the end of the year, there is an unknown value amount of a thing, whether it's a gift or dollars, that is bestowed upon you based on how well the company is doing, possibly also based on merit performance, but not in a formulaic expected way in theory. We got into a really interesting conversation about the risk of just simply it being the same every year.
Yeah.
So there was a couple things that came up. One, let's just stick with dollars for a second before we talk about gifts, or actually not. Let's say you get a turkey every year. Okay. Every year you get a turkey, then you expect that you just come to expect that that's what happens, that there's going to be a turkey.
There is going to be a turkey.
Similar kind of thing. I had a client, and this came up in this, who was giving bonuses that to him were somewhat arbitrary, not even realizing that he actually had created, they were very similar every year. So within a couple $100 of the exact same amount. Yeah. And one year when he wasn't able to do that, like people were like, oh, but I consider that like my everyday thing. Whereas if one year he gave out 500 and the next year it was, 2,800 and then it was 750. Like there was some value if you don't want the thing to accidentally be considered an expected delivery device at that time of the year, there's some value or importance to have it be varied so that it stays unexpected. And so it was just a kind of a trap you can fall into.
You can, but so the expectation, by the way, I feel it's incumbent upon me to point out that that missing those expectations, falling short of those expectations of the bonus was really the beginning of the plot and the foundation for National Lampoon's Vacation. And
wait, what?
Yeah, no, Chevy Chase was his whole family is gathered around.
It took me a second.
He's waiting to get the bonus. He opens it. It's certainly not what he expects. He's in a rage, and that story ended with his taking Wally the moose hostage at Wally World. And so there's a danger in not meeting expectations because you might find yourself taking a theme park character hostage.
Exactly.
Well, it's a natural line.
And the problem is, I think, and this came out loud and clear yesterday. I think sometimes expectations are being set and you don't even realize it. Like you have no idea that you're setting an expectation. And then, as the business owner, you're just not aware that there is a pattern developing and then it sort of feels like an expectation.
Right. And I do know, I think you become aware, you might be in denial, but I do think you become aware as a business owner that there's a pattern developing. Because if you think about it, like if I'm thinking about it, we're in the fourth quarter looking towards bonuses. If I decided in my mind I was not giving a bonus this year, unless people knew that we were just in dire straits and we really were having severe cash flow issues.
Unless you'd recently come through and say, let me just, do all of you need this job?
Unless we start charging for soft drinks in the, trying to turn the kitchen into a profit center. Unless people know that, then if I decided we weren't giving bonuses because I want to reinvest in the company and we have expansion plans or whatever, there are going to be some really irritated people. Some people, I think, base their, well, I'm going to put off getting my new refrigerator until I get my bonus, or I'm
also an interesting thing that came out about how close you are to the holidays. Like if people are expecting it, and then on, December 18th, they find out they're not getting a bonus. Right. Some of them may have already committed to things.
They've charged things. They were waiting to pay off their credit card.
Yep.
So you're right. There's a huge difference between the surprise of that I started with the Nordstrom's thing or the Wicked thing, which was really out of the blue
Truly
and unexpected. And not tied to company business. It was just a thank you. I hope you think it's a cool place to work and you get to interact with people. And it's, we're coming up on the holidays. And so I'm going to figure out what kind of bonus to give you. And they're expecting a bonus. And
yeah, it's funny. I had I think anything that, there's an overarching issue here that goes way beyond this conversation because it applies to many, many things in business, but just the awareness. It doesn't mean, and there's a big difference between an awareness and you are obligated to make decisions based on this awareness, but just the awareness that anything that creates a pattern is at risk for becoming an expectation.
Yeah.
And that awareness that one of the stories that was told in another conversation about this was someone who worked at a place where he was like, I came to know that like when we were having a good year at this place, I would get a $5,000-ish bonus, $5,000 bonus. He's like, when we were having a bad year, I would get around a $1,000 bonus. Give or take, it wasn't like exactly 5, exactly 1, but it was somewhere between 46 and 53. He said, to me, those all felt like $5,000. And the other ones I got all felt like $1,000. Yeah. And so I was going into a year thinking the end of a year, thinking we were having a good year. So I was expecting $5,000-ish, give or take, He was like, and it was much, much, much closer to the 1,000. He goes, there was never like any kind of formulaic thing that said I should have an expectation of that. He said, but it's just, he goes, and the really funny thing is, and I thought this was interesting. He said, I didn't even know that I had that patterned expectation until it was not met.
Yeah.
And then I was able to articulate this thing that in that moment felt like science, like this is how the world works. He goes, if you'd asked me, if somebody was, if somebody was coming to work for the firm, he said, I never would have said, well, on good years, you'll get this. And on bad years, you'll get that. He goes, it didn't feel that way until that expectation's toes were stepped on.
But you also have,
and then I realized it.
So you have the message that's sending. If you take that forward, and I don't know if it's true with him, but if you take it forward and he gets his $1,700 bonus, which to him falls closer, in the $1,000 range, maybe all of a sudden he starts thinking, oh, maybe we're struggling. Maybe we're not having a good, maybe the company's in more trouble than I thought. That actually
came up. He was like, wait, is something happening? I don't know. So and all this is not to say don't do surprise bonuses, but I do think there's a instead of there being this huge continuum between complete random surprise of in July, we go to Nordstrom's, and all the way on the other very, very, very end of that is performance-based incentive plans on a formula that is an expected part of comp, that maybe there should be less grayscales between those two, that maybe it should be a little bit more like 2 swim lanes. I'm either wanting to like surprise and delight, and it's random and it's not based on anything. Well, it's based on things, how well the company's doing and whatnot, but it's more not something that someone is going to be expecting, or it's a very clear expectation, and we don't run the risk of someone having an expectation that I, in my effort to do something nice, accidentally don't meet an expectation. I mean, it's like such a bummer, because I've had clients just be gutted because they went into a moment thinking that they were just going to get this like eye sparkle of love from the person that they genuinely, with great integrity and authenticity, wanted to thank, and they wanted this person to know how much they value them. And instead they get a scoff and a harumph, and somebody feels like, that is the worst of all the worst.
Oh,
when that happens.
It's horrible. Like, or even people don't even remember. They don't say thank you or whatever. But that's the different issue. That just real quick, when you said they're in different lanes, or maybe they can be in different lanes. To me, the different lanes are, I think the surprises, for me, they're given with an eye toward the story. I want it to be memorable. Hey, one time the company did that. So if I just decided, you know what? We're doing pretty well. And just as a thank you, not as our Christmas bonus, I'm going to give everybody, I don't know, a $250 gift card to spend whatever they want. And that's fine. It's like, oh, okay, well, that's great. Thank you. I really appreciate that. But it's not a story. Yeah. It doesn't build on anything with me.
Oh, I love that.
But when my client took them to Nordstrom, and he could give them the same $250 or whatever the number is, but that's a story because the company did that. And that's the difference.
That is interesting. I love that.
So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories.
Your stories.
You can find links to that group as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us.
Which
is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.